I chose the same topic from my research paper for this informative speech. The topic I will be covering is the Clean Air Act versus recognizing the Protection of Motorsports Act, or RPM Act for short. Since the RPM Act is fairly new, I will be spending more time covering it versus the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act is a very good thing and should always be evolving to meet the needs of our environment. The Clean Air Act does good things for our environment, such as promoting plans for pollution reduction to help better our planet. It was first enacted in 1955 and has gone through a few major revisions trying to reduce emissions for passenger vehicles and heavy-duty trucks. Since 1968, the Clean Air Act has required vehicles to meet emission standards. The Clean Air Act was revised in 1990 to significantly tighten the emission standards. The revisions included light-duty vehicles, which include SUVs, cars, minivans, and most pickup trucks. The hydrocarbon standard was reduced by 40%, and the nitrogen oxide was reduced by 50%. These standards are referred to as Tier 1, and they are phased in over the 1994 through 1996 model year pollutants. Throughout the years, the CAA, Clean Air Act, was revised to tighten the emission standards. In the early 2000s, the use of renewable fuels like ethanol started to become more popular. Tier 2 standards requiring the emission reduction of 77 to 95% from cars and light trucks, and they were phased in between the 2004 and 2009 model years. Back in 2014, the EPA introduced the Tier 3 standards for light-duty vehicles. These requirements are required to cut another 70 to 80% compared to Tier 2. The Tier 3 standard is being phased in currently. It started back in 2017 and will go to 2027. Greenhouse gases are on the rise, and the issue needs to be addressed for long-term survival of our planet. It is important to do our part as citizens of Earth to reduce emissions, but motorsports should not be eliminated as a way to do this. Over the last few years, the EPA has been using the Clean Air Act to target the motorsports industry and motor vehicles that have been modified for competition. That includes the different racing divisions, performance parts manufacturers, retailers who sell those performance parts, and performance shops. The EPA's concerns for emissions does not consider the true impact of drag racing. Not only does racing cause minimal emissions compared to other sources, but there are many other ways to lower pollution emissions, and there is potential negative economic impact that could come from banning all racing. The RPM Act was introduced in 2017 with a goal of protecting our right to modify our street vehicles so we can compete in the various forms of motorsports. It would amend the CAA's definition of motor vehicles to exclude vehicles that are modified solely for competition, and it would make the manufacture, sale, installation, and use of defeat devices that bypass emission controls legal only for competitive motorsports. There are many types of racing, and they have one major thing in common. They use vehicles that have been registered for road use, which is why the Environmental Protection Agency is concerned with the vehicle's emissions and is taking the opportunity to have an influence. From the New York Times article, Crackdown on Emissions, Defeat Devices has amateur racers up in arms. Corey Willis, who is a racing parts shop owner in Louisiana, states the EPA's new rules will 100% eliminate racing within 10 years. Every drag strip across the country will be wiped out. No circle tracks, no sprint cars. It all will end. The EPA has a concern for emissions, but not for the racing business. The drag racing industry is very important and has a positive economic impact that outweighs its emissions concerns. According to the article, NHRA race brings funds for fans, economic boost for region. Drew Bedard, Bristol Motor Speedway, claims, I would say the Tri-Cities grow by 100,000 people on an NHRA weekend. It brings a ton of revenue and tax dollars. In the article titled, Is NASCAR Really That Bad for the Environment? They found that in a single typical NASCAR race weekend, more than 40 cars at high speeds for 500 miles at 5 miles per gallon of gas results in about 6,000 gallons of fuel used. Each gallon burned emits about 20 pounds of carbon dioxide, so that's about 120,000 pounds of CO2 for a race weekend. The EPA has a right to be concerned about emissions that result from racing. That number is really high, but those types of races do not happen every single day. One place where the EPA should focus more is either agriculture or energy industries. According to the research gathered by European Environmental Agency, road transportation only emits about 14.3% of acidic pollution compared to other major sources such as agriculture, which is 27.2, and energy industries, which is 30.3. The EPA nor the EEA should not be concerned about drag racing vehicles that are under the road transport category. These agencies should be looking to make corrections on other, more impactful contributors of pollution. From the article, Air Pollution, Everything You Need to Know, it mentions, by switching over to renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power, we can help reduce the amount of pollution in the environment. There are other ways to help reduce pollution besides banning race cars. One of the goals of the EPA is to limit the global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius by reducing the amount of emissions by 2.5% per year. The goal is reasonable and should be supported for health of our planet. But banning racing would not reduce emissions by that much. Other sources would do a better job at reducing emissions.